Thank you so much for joining me today for my masterclass, The Power of Language. Like I said, it's been a dream of mine for a long time to start doing these masterclasses and share so many of the things that have been helping me and helping my clients with you, the public. And I decided to start with language because I work with so many different people, particularly in coaching and obviously in hypnotherapy as well, but really in the coaching setting for so many different things. People come as executives or for depression or anxiety or loss of motivation in life or finding their why. And I realized very quickly that I was constantly starting in one place with everyone. And that place was language and self-reflecting and kind of realizing the power of our language, that our language actually shapes the way we perceive ourselves, the way we perceive ourselves in relation to the world, and what we perceive as what's possible for us. And a huge part of this is that whatever we normalize to ourselves becomes normal to us. Another way to say this is you can make anything familiar and anything unfamiliar, but I really like to go with the normalizing. So you can normalize anything to yourself, and whatever you normalize becomes normal to you. And whenever I think about this, I always think about friends that I have that will share memes all the time of, oh, it's Monday, dreary, tired, drinking the coffee, start the work week. And then they share memes on Friday. Yay, it's the weekend, like freedom kind of thing. And you might think that that's innocuous, but what you're kind of normalizing to yourself is this mundane disliking of your regular schedule, disliking of your work week, and that shapes what we perceive as reality. I actually hate that word, but I'm going to use it here. The way we speak about things, whatever we normalize to ourselves becomes what we perceive as reality. And, I had a really interesting session with a client recently, and she was just talking about kind of being unhappy and a little bit depressed. And she kept saying, I have to come back to reality. I have to come back to reality. And I said, what does that mean to you? It seems like reality for you is very heavy. And she said, I've looked at this and looked at that, and I just finished school, but I can see that other people that do what I do are quite tired and don't seem to, like their job. And she's like, but that's normal, right? Everyone hates their job. And I said, is it? Is that normal? Do you think I hate my job? And she was like, oh, actually, no, I think you like your job. And I was like, okay. So you've had this belief. Everyone hates their job. You've been saying it out loud. You've been thinking it. And now your mind has shown you proof. You just listed off all this evidence of people, situations, things that reinforce that belief. Everyone hates their job. But what if you had a different belief? What if you believed that you could love your job, that people love their jobs, that people do fulfilling things that they can't get enough of? What proof could you find of that? And in a few minutes, she was able to list off all of these things that she had known, different people, different situations that had always been there, but she had never seen before, because we all are subject to this thing called confirmation bias, which means whatever we believe, whatever we tell ourselves, our mind looks for proof. It looks for evidence everywhere in the environment. And you've seen this, experienced this yourself. If you've ever bought a new car, maybe you got, I don't know, a red Mazda, and you used to see that car on, you knew it existed, but there weren't that many of them. And then suddenly you have this car and now you see it everywhere. Or maybe someone gets a certain breed of dog, like a pug, and you suddenly see pugs everywhere, pugs out in public, pug memes. It's everywhere. And that's because it's making it through your filter. And so the same thing happens with a belief. If you believe that everyone hates their job, then every time you see a situation that could prove that, your mind highlights it to you. And all these other situations, like, myself, that I did know this client because we worked together, and all these other pieces of evidence that prove a different story are just disregarded to the mind. And so a big part of that starts with the stories that we tell ourselves. And we have to ask, what is the story I'm telling myself? Another thing that this always makes me think of is I used to be in this pattern. It's quite funny to reflect on now, but I would get to the end of the day and I would sit there and go, oh, like I'm angry and mad and I hate this and I hate that and I hate everything. And like, I hate my job. I hate my life. And then one day, as I was on this incredible journey, I just realized I'm just tired. I'm just tired. That's it. Nothing's wrong. I don't hate anything. Nothing terrible is happening. I'm actually just tired. And because I feel tired, I'm going on this rant about everything, but it's making me believe it. I always tell clients, don't rethink your life when you're not feeling good because everything you look at won't look good. We all look at it through the lens of how we're feeling, right? Don't rethink your life when you're not feeling good. And that's what I was doing is that I was tired. And so I was telling myself all of these things that I hate or that I don't like. But see, the mind doesn't know, the mind doesn't care. The mind is always listening to how you talk about yourself, how you talk about the world, how you talk about things in your life. And if you're constantly saying, I hate my life, I hate my job, I hate my life, I hate my job, then that creates a blueprint, that creates that lens that you're seeing the world through. And just like that girl who had this belief everyone hates their job and was finding it proof of everywhere, you'll start to find proof of that. You'll start to notice the part, everyone has parts of their job, parts of their life that they like and don't like. But if you start telling yourself that, then your mind highlights it and goes, here's evidence of this. Here's evidence of that. You don't like it because of this. This is not good because of that. And that's really what we don't want to happen. Another story, I was kind of on vacation with friends. It was actually kind of a working vacation when I used to do photography and videography. And I met this beautiful, really emotionally intelligent young lady. But I couldn't help but notice she was leaving a day early. And I couldn't help but notice that she kept saying, oh, I have to leave. I have to go to this family thing. I really don't want to. I wish I didn't have to go. I wish I could stay. And after a while, and we had really been bonding, so I felt like it was okay. And after a while of listening to this, I said to her, I was like, the things you're saying aren't even true, and they're making you feel very disempowered. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, how old are you? And she was 23. And I was like, do you live with your parents? And she said, no. And I was like, do you support yourself? And she said, yeah, of course. And I said, so you don't actually have to leave. Like, you could just decide to stay, and that would be fine. And she was like, I guess so. And I said, so why didn't you say that? And she was, what do you mean? I said, why didn't you say, I would love to stay, but I've chosen to honor this family commitment to prioritize being a good daughter or whatever that means to you. And I've chosen to feel great about it. And she was just like, what? But as we talked through it and she thought about it, her whole demeanor shifted because, when you say, I have to do this. I wish I could stay. What your mind hears and what you're really saying about yourself is I'm powerless. I don't have any control of my life. I'm a victim of this circumstance when in fact, the complete opposite is true. In this situation, she had actually chosen to honor this commitment, to make it a priority. And so when we change our language, it puts us back in the driver's seat of our life. Another thing, I work with so many entrepreneurs that their business starts to get busy and then they start telling themselves a story about how horrible it is. I was talking to one of my friends that owns a dance studio and she was saying, oh, and there's this and that and a million registrations and I have to do so many things. And so I said, but isn't this always what you've been working towards? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, your business is thriving. That's why you have all of these things, right? This is a good problem. And so what if you change that and say, I have so much on my plate because my business is thriving. Everything that I've always been working towards is coming true. And now I can adapt. Now I can learn. I can choose what to prioritize, choose what to outsource, maybe hire someone. And she just went, oh my God, you're right. And within a week, I got a message from her saying, thank you so much. That one little shift, that one little reframe has just changed the way I've been feeling about everything. And everything that I complain about, I go, wait, no, this is happening because my business is thriving. And it's funny, I'm in this entrepreneur group and someone was posting the other day, why do entrepreneurs sometimes kind of start blazing and then burn out? And I honestly think that this is one of the reasons is that it's really easy, when the honeymoon phase of anything wears off, to just get into this kind of state of going, I hate this. I don't want to do it. And, my teacher, Marissa, says to your mind, I don't want to means let me delay you. And the way I like to say it is when you say, I don't want to, you're wiring dread into things. And so, maybe we'll have a new business or maybe we'll have a new friendship or a new relationship or just something new in our life. And we go, I love maybe even an activity, a hobby. And we go, I love this. It's so fun. I'm so excited about it. And then after doing it a certain number of times, it becomes a little bit more mundane. And we start saying, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't feel like doing that. I don't like that. And you start wiring dread to it. And then you've got this attachment from the thing that you once wanted. And now dread is attached to that. And your mind doesn't want to do things that you dread doing. So you start pushing them down and creating this resistance. And now you have to push through this resistance to do the thing that you wanted. And I think that that is a dynamic that is very present in many people. I don't think I know that it's present in many people and many entrepreneurs, that we wire dread into things that we want to do. And then we think that we don't want to because we've told ourselves this story. And I am going to have a time for questions about midway through. So if you guys do have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I would love to go through and answer. And, in order to write this talk or this masterclass, whatever you want to call it, I was, thinking back to when did I first start noticing this? And something that I always go back to is reading Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's an incredible book about financial intelligence. But he talks about in that book, the language of the poor is I can't. And the language of the wealthy is how can I? The language of the poor is I can't. And the language of the wealthy is how can I? And I always thought that was interesting. I always thought about that and reflected on it. But of course, as I did all of the training that I have now, I started to understand why on a deeper level. And you hear people saying all the time, I can't do that. I can't afford that. I'll never be able to have a house. That will never work for me. And you might think that that's innocuous, that you can say, I can't, and then you can just go and do something anyways. But the thing about it is that the deeper part of your mind is, again, looking for reasons that's true. So if you say all the time, I can't buy a house, then whenever you hear someone saying, oh, I can't buy a house, it's just ridiculous. You're like, oh, yeah, that's true. Whenever you hear on the news, housing prices are surging, your mind goes, oh, yeah, that's true. And it builds this wall. Your mind looks for all the reasons that you can't, and then it proves it true. And if you start asking yourself, how can I? That paves a road rather than building a wall. And your mind will start looking for reasons, not even consciously. We've all had those moments where you're thinking about something. How am I going to deal with this? Maybe it's a scheduling thing. How am I going to go on vacation? And we've all also had a time where we've been determined to, I hear this all the time when I start teaching these things. Almost every person has a moment in their life when they were determined to do something, determined to go on a vacation, determined to do some schooling, determined to do a training, determined maybe even to date someone. And we suddenly get into this thing, I'm going to do this no matter what. And it doesn't seem possible, but then we always find a way, even if it's, a lot of money. Many people solve that problem. In another financial book that's kind of funny, this guy was a very high level accountant and he used to have to go to criminal cases all the time. And he kind of said, you would see these people that would have absolutely no money, but once bail was set, they would always find the money. And I always thought that was so funny and just proof of this, because of course, when we ask ourselves, how can I? And we decide I am going to make this happen, we almost always find a way. And it's not just about your conscious mind. When you start asking yourself, how can I do this? How can this be possible for me? The deeper part of your mind, the part of your mind that really runs the show, the part of your mind that's like a supercomputer, starts processing the environment, looking through everything from the past, looking through that whole mind map of everything you know and looking for solutions. And then you wake up one morning and you suddenly go, oh my God, I could do this. And it's because you've been asking how. And so your mind has been searching for solutions. And again, activating that pathway of confirmation bias, thinking, how can I do this? And I am going to do this. And then your mind finds a way and makes it real. So there's an example of with your language of saying I can't versus how can I? And you can decide to build a wall or pave a road to solutions. So one of the things I want to take you from today is to really reflect on that. What am I saying I can't do, can't have, not as possible for me? I had a conversation with a fellow therapist recently, and she had just graduated. And she said, I'm happy. I'm so thrilled. I'm so excited. And now there's no clients. And I said, what? Why would you even say that? You don't want that to be true, because if you're saying it's not true, you've got to you've got to sorry, just gonna try. I'd rather not look at the screen. I do this. Sometimes I look at the messages as they come through and I distract myself. If you don't want that to be true, and if you don't want your mind to look for proof of that, you can't say it. And of course, we all know that the mind doesn't know what don't is. So, if you say, don't look at the back of my laptop, then your attention is drawn to the back of my laptop. If you think, you know, don't think about your breath, your mind is drawn to thinking about your breath. So you have to do something else instead. You have to say there's clients everywhere. Every person in the world needs therapy, really. So there's clients everywhere, right? And then that becomes true. So, some other examples that I love of telling ourselves things using language in a way that is kind of detrimental to us and completely untrue is it can be as innocuous as talking about the weather. People will say things like, this rain is killing me. And I always have to stop at that and go, is this rain killing you? Or is it a mild inconvenience that you're noticing right now? Right? And people will stop and laugh at that because they realize that it's true. And people sometimes we make a mountain out of a molehill. Another one is, when you start telling yourself you're going to have a bad day, boy, do you have a bad day. I don't know if you've ever woken up and missed your alarm, or you have to get up early and then you go to make coffee and you realize there's no cream. It's going to be a bad day today. And then you're in the shower and then maybe you burn yourself or the water's too cold. And then you're just like, yeah, it's ruined. This day is ruined. This day is awful. I'm having such a bad day. You get to work. First thing, like, how are you? I'm having the worst day. It's just the worst day. I missed my alarm. There was no cream for coffee. I burnt myself in the shower. I got splashed on the way. I am just having the worst. I hate to tell you, but we got an email. We've got a meeting with that boss that we don't like today. And see, today. It's just ruined. It's just ruined, and we carry that with us and we ruin our day by telling ourselves all of this, and the opposite of that, of course, is going, it's fine. I can get a coffee downstairs on the way, or maybe just drink it black. I don't like the taste. It's not the end of the world, you know? Being in the shower, being like, "Oh, it's fine," just flipping it back and choosing, "No, I'm choosing to have a good day." I would even in that situation sit down and say, "I'm letting all of this go, and I'm choosing. I'm having a good day. I'm having a great day." And sometimes when I say things like this, people say, should I sort of invalidate the way that I feel? Sometimes this is always the thing with affirmations or positive language, that the resistance that I run into when I talk about it is people say, am I invalidating my experience? Am I just lying to myself? And in some ways you are, but you want to move out of whatever you're feeling that's not good. So I'll give you an example. People will say things like, I have depression. I have anxiety. I am anxious. I am sad. I am in a rut. I am overwhelmed. And you can acknowledge that. It is important to acknowledge the state that you're in, but we always want to be moving out of it. So the two things, this is another thing that'd be a great thing to write down. The two things that I like to add if you're expressing a way that you're feeling that's negative is time and separation of I'm feeling. And so what that looks like is you could say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And that immediately takes the state of you and removes it from the thing you're experiencing. And that might sound really subtle, but to your mind, it can be quite profound. And then you add time as well. Exactly. And then you add time as well. So you would say, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. So now we have a separation from you, oops, sorry, I just tapped the microphone. That's really loud. Of you, the authentic being that you are, and the thing that you're experiencing that is not you. And now we've added a measure of time to it, which implies to you and your mind that it's something you're moving through, that's something you're going to end. When you say, I am depressed, sounds like that's just your resting state. When you say, I'm feeling depressed, it's this thing that you're experiencing. When you say, I am feeling depressed right now or today, it implies that when today ends, depression could end too. If you say, I'm feeling stressed right now, it implies it's this separate thing from who you are. And right now, and you can just start that process of I'm feeling stressed right now. And I'm actually feeling stressed because of this, but that's fine because that's not going to come home with me. That's not going to be my state tomorrow. And so when we start describing things that are negative as a separate from ourselves, as separate from being permanent, that wasn't a great way to word that. I apologize. That wasn't very good language. But you get what I'm saying. When you create that separation, it doesn't define you. It doesn't affect you in the same way. And you can say, I'm experiencing this thing now, but I'm also choosing to XYZ feel better, not let this bad day in. So and again, when you change what's normal to you, the most amazing thing happens. You start noticing. So it's one of my favorite, absolute favorite moments on client journeys. People will often say to me things like, oh, since we've been doing this, I've started to notice how negative some of my friends are, how negative the news is, how many limiting ideas are out there, how much conventional wisdom actually isn't wise. And I always love that because it was so normal to you before that you were accepting that. That person was accepting that as their reality, but that's not actually reality. That was just the lens that they were seeing. And so when you start to make these changes, when you start to change what's normal to you through your language, which is very simple, it just requires, some time and dedication and self-reflection, you start to change what's normal to you. And then you start noticing that. You start going, oh, actually, that person says a lot of limiting beliefs. Oh, actually, this person is repeating all of these I cans. And that was normal to me. And I used to just sit there and go, oh, yeah, that's terrible. The world's going to shit, la, 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 la. And actually, I don't think that that's true. And I don't want that. And I don't want to see the world that way. And I certainly don't want to feel that way. So I'm going to not let that in. And not letting things in gives us a tremendous amount of power, an incredible ability to decide our narrative, the way we're going to feel, the way we're going to see the world. And that starts with sometimes just stating, I'm not letting that in, making a conscious choice to speak the way you want to speak, to think the way you want to think, to be the director of your own voice, of your own language. And, you know, I will warn you, sometimes people get really excited about this and then they start saying things to others like, you shouldn't say that. You're being too negative. You're being negative. Michael says XYZ. That tends to be not received well. And we've all probably had a personal experience of that. But what you can do and I really think it starts with you. You really want to wire this in and make this your normal before you start trying to sort of voice it into the world. But something I teach my clients is what I call a gentle reframe. What a gentle reframe is just like when I said about the weather, when someone says, this rain is killing me, it's ruining my day, it's ruining my life, you say, this rain is an inconvenience and it'll end soon. And the thing is, when you say it like that, people tend to realize they tend to just let it in and laugh. And so I give an example with a client. I said, I was working with this client and she was amazing. She was so committed. We did RTT and coaching, and a good way through the journey, there just everything, she was doing this gentle reframing with her family and everything was getting better and better and better. And, she was sort of looking to her husband for feedback and saying, aren't things great? This is amazing. And he said, yeah, things are good right now. And she came back to that and she was like, she couldn't really fully articulate why that annoyed her so much, but she brought that back to one of our coaching sessions. And I said, it's simple. You just take the time off of that and you say, no, things are good, period. This is who we are now. And she went back and reframed that to her husband. And so another way to think about this is that, we all have these ups and downs. And in our language, we are proving what is our natural state? And whatever our natural state is, our mind will try to bring us back to. So if you always, when you're up, say, things are good right now, this is an amazing time. Oh, I wish it could stay like this. What you're signaling, what you're saying to your mind is this is temporary. And down here, when things are bad, is my resting state. Similarly, if you always say I'm depressed or I feel bad or I'm anxious or I'm stressed or I'm overwhelmed without any time on it, then your mind is hearing this is our normal state. And then this is unfamiliar. So this is resistance bringing you down. So we want to have the opposite. We want to put time limits on when we're feeling negative. I'm feeling this right now. I'm feeling this right now. But this up here, this is who I am. This is my emotional home. This is the way that I be. This is the true me, the authentic way, the way that I show up for my life and I feel. And then the resistance is up here, which means that when you're down here, everything's trying to bring you back up here because you've signaled to yourself, to your mind, to the world through your language that no, this is who I am. And then all of that's helping you. If you imagine this is like water, it's like you're an exercise ball that's always trying to float up to the surface instead of being a rock that's always trying to sink. And what decides if you're a rock or an exercise ball trying to float up is the way you speak to yourself, the way you imply time, the way you imply what's your natural state and what's something you're experiencing and when it's going to end. And I think one of the final points I want to make is, we tell ourselves these stories. And sometimes when we tell a story, and what I mean by that is interpreting a situation a certain way, we become the person in the story, which is often who we don't want to be. And I'll give you an example of this. I had a client recently, it was lots of client stories, and she had I think it was, yeah, it was a father-in-law. So her father-in-law had wanted them to sign a prenup. And she had started telling herself this story. He hates me. He thinks I'm a monster. He thinks I'm just after my future husband's money, all this stuff. And so she became very sort of snitty with this father-in-law. She was like, short with him and just treated him like he was a monster. And she sort of became the person in the story. Oh, he sees me as being this negative person. And then so she was negative to him. She became the person in that story. And as she moved on, she realized that actually they didn't know each other very well at all. And that he just loved his son and wanted to protect him and wanted the best for him. And that's actually what she wanted as well. And so she was able to change that story in her head and say, oh, he's actually just protecting, he just really loves his son. And I actually really love his son as well. And that shifted her whole world and they found common ground. And then they began to have a great relationship. And so sometimes we create these stories in our head and we actually become the negative person in the story that we're telling ourselves that we don't want to be removed from our authentic self. And we also, if we're not grounded, if we're not aware, yes, I totally relate to that. Good. I love that. If we're not aware, we can also become the person in someone else's story. If you have an ex that says you're needy or you're this and you're that, you will let that in and you start going, oh, I'm needy. Or maybe they say you're selfish. Oh, I'm selfish. That may be true and maybe not. It might actually have just been that you were constantly expressing your need for connection and they had an avoidant attachment style. It could be that you were actually good at setting healthy boundaries with your time, with your energy, with your attention. And this other person didn't like that. But see, if we let in other people's stories and we start telling ourselves the story of I'm needy, then we become needy. If you start letting in the story of I'm selfish, then you start to see yourself as selfish as a negative thing. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't always use our discernment. Of course, we should always use our discernment. We should always self-reflect. We should always, ask ourselves, is this true? But we have to be careful to not tell ourselves a story, to not tell ourselves other people's stories. And, that's one of the biggest things I want you to take away from today is to ask yourself, listen to what you say. The whole point, the biggest thing that you can take from today is listen to what you're saying. Listen to what you're telling yourself. Listen to what you're saying out loud and ask yourself, is this true? And second, do I want it to be true? And if you don't want it to be true, then don't say it. Just like that new therapist who said there's no clients. Do you want that to be true? Stop saying it. It's that really it's that simple because your mind is always listening. And this is kind of a cheesy thing, but people say it and it helps me remember is people will say that's why it's called spelling, like casting a spell. Whatever you're saying, you're casting a spell on yourself. Anyway, I know that's kind of like cheesy, a little bit woo woo, but it helps me remember it sometimes. And I chuckle to myself and think that because, it's really true when you tell yourself this thing, whatever you say, your mind looks for proof and then it works to make it real. And if you're telling yourself a story that you don't want to be true, that's not the story of your life. You really do have the power to change that, to interrupt it. So I love interaction. It feels a little bit like I'm on the spot sometimes, but I really want to answer questions and have that conversational element. So I am going to take questions. I hope you guys are all enjoying it so far. So I'm just going to look at the chat and see if there are any questions here. Someone said, I've got an interview for a job I've always wanted. I keep telling myself I've got this. How can I boost myself further? Any thoughts would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, telling yourself, if you get nervous, tell yourself, no, I'm excited. I want this. I'm amazing at speaking. I'm likable. I'm going to walk through it in your head. I think another tool that's not really power of language is also just visualizing. Our mind doesn't know the difference between what we actually do and what we visualize. And people will say things, not people say things, you'll see studies all the time now, they'll take piano players and they'll put them in three groups and one group won't practice at all. One group will just visualize practicing and one group will actually do it. And what they find is that the group that visualizes has between 30 and 60%, usually depending on the study, amount of improvement as the ones that are actually doing it. So if you visualize situations the way you want them to be, you're more likely to actually have it go that way. And similarly, if you have situations in the past, actually I love that you brought this up because with language, this is actually part of how I reprogrammed my mind with language is because I would be very conscious of this on my own. And then I would get into conversations where it was so normal to talk in that negative about limitation and I would get drawn back into it. And so what I would do is afterwards, I would realize I'm like, oh, I got drawn into that talking about people, just going on a tirade, maybe bitching about something. And sorry for the language. And then I would go back and I would visualize that conversation again. And in my mind, I would sort of reimagine myself saying all of the things that I wanted to say and responding. And that actually helps to rewire your brain, your nervous system, so that in the future, you're more likely to respond in the way that you want. I'll say I have sadness because I know it's temporary. Yes, adding time to everything. I have learned to say that I am feeling blank. And so what? I can still choose to make things happen. Exactly. I love that. It's so true. We don't have to give all our powers to the feelings. Our feelings, in many ways, are the most real thing we have, but they don't have to rule us. And we can shift the way we talk about them. We can do things in regardless of how we're feeling. It creates separation from you. Yes. I find it not hard not to let things in from people really close to me. That is true. And again, that visualizing can be really, really powerful going back and revisualizing those interactions in a different way. And then visualizing future interactions, visualizing people close to you, not letting things in, not letting it affect you, visualizing who and how you want to be. And then, doing as much as you can to embody that. You can also visualize that you have kind of like a shield. I often like when people start spouting limiting beliefs, I just imagine this blue shield and I say to myself, I'm not letting that in. I'm not letting that in. And it might sound silly, but it really does have an impact. And the other thing is, have patience with yourself, have kindness with yourself, because a lot of this stuff is really, really, really ingrained in us. I see so many clients that are pragmatic and are having a very realistic, heavy, realistic life. And, the way we learned the world is, many of us growing up, being pragmatic actually seems incredibly sensible because if you don't expect too much, then you'll probably get, a realistic outcome, right? Because we've all heard, the difference in satisfaction and disappointment is the difference between expectations and reality. And that is true. However, what's expected also tends to be realized if you go back to the how can I and I can. You're also creating a map of what's possible for you. And if by being really pragmatic, you're or realistic in a kind of like heavy sense, you're creating a blueprint of not very exciting things and you're going to have a kind of mediocre life. And so we want to be a little bit more optimistic. We want to look at what can be possible because, people that are dreamers, people that are visionaries, people that have extraordinary lives, they go, I have this dream and I'm going to make it real and I'm not going to give up on it. And people always look at them like they're crazy. Conventional wisdom always says, oh, that's not a good idea. But the people that decide, no, I'm going to follow this path, I'm going to make this happen. We didn't get iPhones or Teslas by people going, oh, I'm going to make a realistic product and do what I think is possible. No, they're going to go, I have this dream for this thing that's never existed before, and I'm gonna make it a reality. And then they do. So going on. Any other questions? Yes, you've hugely helped me with this line. Your body doesn't know the difference between nervousness and excited. Yeah, that didn't come from me. That came from Marissa Peer. But yes, it's true. Your body doesn't know the difference between nervousness and excitement. And it's true. And when we were learning that in school, it was so funny because they read to us. Marissa read this. I think it was like two different like statements people had made. It was two celebrities, and one had said, before I go on stage, my heart races, my hands shake, I start sweating, I have anxiety, I'm so nervous. It's the worst thing in the world. I had to stop performing. And then it was another celebrity, who was like another rock star, and said, in another statement said essentially, before I go on stage, my heart starts pounding. I get so nervous. I start sweating. It's the best feeling in the world. There's nothing like it. And the difference is that meaning, that story of what we're telling ourselves this means. And you really do have that much power. I'm going to be honest with you. This is my first one by myself masterclass live stream. And I've been planning this for such a long time, but right before my heart started pounding, oh my God, this is actually happening. And I said to myself, I'm excited, not nervous. So that's good. Definitely training your mind to familiar. I know I catch myself saying negative things and that's good. Sometimes people say, oh, it's so hard. It was what you can reframe that. It doesn't have to be so hard. You can say, oh, I'm noticing how important this is. I'm noticing how much I do this. I'm noticing that this is a thing that I want to prioritize because we go, oh, I do this all the time. It's so hard. Again, do you want it to be hard? No, you want to put effort into it. And, if you're noticing, that's amazing because before there was a time that was normalized, that was normal to you, and you weren't even noticing it. So if you're noticing it now, it means the blinders are off. And many people think, oh, I'm not that negative. And usually I have clients that say, oh, I don't think like that. And then when they start really learning to self-reflect and to listen, they go, oh my goodness, I say it all the time. And that's the truth for so many of us. But once you start seeing that you say it all the time, you're in such a more empowered position to make change. Um, I have stopped using the word nightmare, and that is the most negative word. Yes. So many people say that. This is a total nightmare. Is it a nightmare? Or are you minorly inconvenienced? How do you shut out all the media blasting? I just don't watch it. I know for some people this can be difficult. I personally don't watch any news. And I'm not saying that this is what you should do. I'm just telling you this is what I do. I listen to podcasts and YouTube and documentaries rather than news and radio. And I really limit Facebook. And you can mute people on Facebook. We all have those people that post that the world is ending every 15 minutes. You can mute those people for 30 days, for 30 whatever. You don't need to let it in. And a lot of people will say, "How will I know about things?" I can assure you that knew about COVID, I know about monkeypox, I know about the financial crisis. The most important information will find its way to you. But, if you're finding out about murders and just different things every day that you have no control over and you just constantly let that in, it's going to make you feel powerless. And one of the number one beliefs that I feel like has to be shifted in a lot of clients is this thing of, the world is terrible. The world is falling apart. And if you listen to the news, it is. But, if you go and watch Discovery Channel or if you go and watch documentaries, there are amazing things that the news will tell you. There's never been so much garbage and there's this and this and this. But if you go and learn about it, there's all of these organizations creating all of these incredible future technologies that are able to clean up and filter huge amounts of pollution of plastic out of the ocean. And so for a lot of these things that we hear all this negative, there's balance. But the news media is ultimately a business and they're in the business of keeping our attention, and our minds are unfortunately wired to look for the negative. Our minds, no one is the exception to this. Our minds are biologically, survival wise, wired to look for the negative, because if you think about in tribal times, if you just went outside and all you thought was, oh, it's a beautiful day, la, 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 you might get killed by a tiger. But so we're wired to look for danger, to look for what could be wrong, to look for predators. If you ever watched, a deer grazing in a field, they're chew the grass, look around, chew the grass, look around. And there's a part of that that's still with us, this primal part of us that's trying to keep us alive. But the media and a lot of negativity is taking advantage of that. So you've just got to limit at least how much. You don't have to do anything. I'm not saying you've got to do anything. This is what I recommend. And something really interesting about this is a lot of people that you listen to, particularly about people that I would consider great people, if you listen to them on podcasts and interviews, will say things like, I don't actually listen to the news. So there are people that do that. I love revisiting the conversation tip because it's so many times after a conversation, I think to myself, I wish I had said this. Yes, agree that visualizing is so powerful. So there are a few more questions. I am. Yes, when we're on autopilot for the reasons I just said, our mind is wired to look for the negative. You were sharing, neutralizing. They say the shield. Yes. If someone for most of their life used very negative language towards themselves and they find it difficult, don't use the word difficult, to make that shift to positive, would you recommend? Yes, I would. Many of us feel guilty for things we've done in the past. And I find everyone on a healing journey has two identities: the person they've always been, which is also the person they've been conditioned to be, and the person they're becoming, their authentic self. And I kind of look at it as a spectrum of identity. When people become self aware and they start growing and healing, we move along this spectrum. But people remember us at different points. And so a lot of times our families remember us as I think of them as little arrows of all these points on our journey of identity. And because people love to go back to what's normal, the mind loves what's familiar, people will try to hold you to the version of you that they know. So as you grow and heal and evolve, people that have always known you here will try to hold you accountable to that version of yourself. And it will make you sometimes feel like you have to hold yourself accountable. But in order to truly move on, you've got to forgive your past self. You've got to forgive things that you've done in the past and let go. And, I had this really interesting situation where I had kind of a distant family member. It was not so recently, but it was recently enough that I was becoming very healed. And they had totally misinterpreted a situation and just thought that I was being a monster. And I realized afterwards that he was kind of holding me accountable to the person that I used to be. And I just kind of realized in that moment, I was like, I get that I did things in the past that weren't great. I wish I had knew what I knew now and had done things differently. But ultimately, for me to be the person that I want to be, I have to forgive myself. And it's okay if you don't want to, but I have to forgive myself. And so maybe just kind of having that conversation with yourself and practicing some self-forgiveness and, really working to let it go. And so the last thing that I want to talk about, because I really have been on a mission to help as many people as I can. And when I started this journey, I just kept saying to myself, how does all of this exist? And people don't know about it. I had been in the personal development world and been into mindset pretty much my whole adult life. And then really when I started to discover things that really work in the last few years, I just, I wanted to just share it, which is why I'm doing this right now and why I'm doing so many of the things that I'm doing. And of course, I've given you so much information today, but information is only the beginning. And all of this is great information. You can take it, you can run with it. But we have to actually implement these things in our lives to make a change. So many of us, have read a book or listened to a podcast or read an article. We're like, that was so interesting. And a couple months later, it's made no changes to your life because you have to actually make the changes in order to have any kind of real lasting impact in your life. And it's always really interesting because I've had a lot of clients that have said, I knew about a lot of this stuff before, but I never actually did it. It never actually worked for me until I did it with you because one, I didn't spend all this time talking with the why and the high and sus, just talked about how to do it and practical tools for implementing it in our life. So I have been working very hard for quite a while now to put together a course. It's called Foundations for an Extraordinary Life. It is a month-long course and basically it just goes through taking all of the elements of how to do basically everything that I teach clients, most of the foundational things. So it starts with the first part is the power of language. The second part is how to create a future self vision, which goes a lot more into detail about some of the visualizations that we were talking about today. The third is to understand your emotions in relationship to understanding and guidance for you. And the last is how to wire it all in and make it work for your life. So I've been working on this for a long time. And again, you can totally take the information today and run with it. Absolutely. But I have made this for anyone that wants more help, more kind of a practical step-by-step how-to guide. And I think too, again, like when people are saying it's hard, if committing to something and going, I'm going to do this every day for the next month and make this a focus and make this a thing and, have an accountability group can be really powerful. So it's there if you want it. You don't have to. I never want to be that person that's pushy, but I do have put a lot into this and I would love to share it with you. So thank you everyone so much for joining me. I'm so happy that you all came today. I'm so overwhelmed and grateful at positive overwhelmed and grateful at the number of people that have shown up. I know so many of you have been huge, huge incredible supporters of mine. It means so, so much to me. And I couldn't be more grateful. I hope that all of this is helpful. I'd love if you reach out in the next couple of weeks and let me know anything that was like a major, aha moment or a win, or you can even share it in the comments right now. But I appreciate you so much. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for today. And yeah, I'm just going to give a big wave to everyone, a big thank you. And I'm so happy to see all of your beautiful faces. And thank you everyone for coming. Lots of love. Goodbye.